Good morning. I'm Jennifer Jones Austin, CEO and Executive Director of FPWA. Welcome to the last of our 5 Real Talks. Real Talks is a collaboration among FPWA, the Citizens Committee for Children, and United Neighborhood Houses that grew out of our collective desire to ensure that in this moment of racial reckoning, as people and institutions, communities, and even cities challenge themselves to confront racism, and the injustice and inequities it has birthed and nurtured, we here in New York City challenge ourselves to do the same. If ever there was a moment to earnestly address the pervasive presence of race and class-based disparities in key societal pillars that directly impact individual and family well-being, it is now. These disparities, laid bare by the disproportionately devastating impact of COVID-19 and the repeated senseless killings and shootings of Black persons by both police and white civilians, demand that we act now. Structural and institutional barriers have long persisted by design and default to keep persons of color and females living in or near poverty. Real Talks aims to surface these barriers and to inform the changes in policy and programs necessary to realize true racial equity for all. Every Thursday this month, in conversation with thought leaders and experts, we have explored issue areas that both define and determine individual and family well-being. We've unpacked the systemic, structural, and institutional barriers in economic opportunity, housing, health, and mental health, and education that disproportionately keep people of color from getting and staying ahead. And we've talked about anti-racist policies and programs that, if embraced by this city, would help us take a giant leap forward towards achieving true and lasting equity and well-being for all. Today's Real Talk will be no different. Today's talk centers on criminal justice, on the inequity in criminal justice that abounds, and what changes must be made to materially and sustainably reverse course for so many and for this nation. Let me remind all who've joined us that you're vital to this conversation. So put your thoughts, comments, and your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. And if we don't get the chance, we'll still consider and incorporate them in our thinking and planning as we move forward. Now I want to introduce you to our panelists, both of whom have done so much to advance criminal justice equity in New York City and in the nation. Recognized in 2014 by the Obama administration as a champion of change for his commitment to helping individuals impacted by the justice system, and by several other influential leaders as a voice to be heard and embraced on matters concerning incarceration and justice, Stanley Richards is the Executive Vice President of the Fortune Society, a service and advocacy nonprofit organization whose mission is to support successful reentry from prison and promote alternatives to incarceration. Nick Turner is a nationally recognized leader in research and policy that results in systems change on the issues most critical to those for whom justice is scarce. As the president of the Vera Institute, he has led the organization in work aimed at ending the misuse of jails, transforming conditions of confinement, and ensuring that justice systems more effectively serve America's growing minority communities. Their work and achievements are too voluminous, too exhaustive, too expansive to list here. So I'm encouraging all of you to read their bios in the chat and to listen intently over the next 50 minutes for what promises to be a conversation rich in content and inspirational in message. Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Stanley.
Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, Jennifer.
So let's jump right in. I'm going to set the stage with some data points that, while all too familiar for many of us, never seek to shock the conscience. Since 1970, the United States incarcerated population has increased by 700%, with 2.3 million people in jail and prison. Approximately 1/3 of the working age population in the United States has a criminal record, 1/3. And the nation now houses roughly the same number of people with criminal records as it does four-year college graduates. Decades of mass incarceration driven by policies targeting low-income communities have resulted in a dramatic increase in the number of justice system impacted individuals, especially individuals of color. In 2015, the incarcerated population in the United States was 56% Black and Latinx, although these groups make up only 32% of the country's population. The criminalization of people of color has been well documented, from the overwhelming proportions of people of color who are stopped, frisked, and summoned, to the number of people of color detained in jails, being forced to take plea deals, often for crimes they didn't commit, and to the individuals re-entering society and being subjected to the collateral consequences of justice involvement. And if you are low income in America, there's a greater risk that you will become justice involved. Here in New York City, as the poverty rates increase across community districts with high percentages of Black and brown people, rates of policing and jail incarceration increase significantly. The 5 community districts with the highest poverty rates are among the 10 community districts with the highest jail incarceration rates. And as we all know all too well, the consequences of justice involvement for persons of color and low-income individuals and their families are severe and pervasive. Many experience societal stigma, reduced access to housing, employment and educational opportunities, enduring trauma and other mental health challenges, growing debt, and poverty or a deepening of poverty. So Stanley, Nick, tell us how we got here. How did this happen in the first place? I'll begin with you, Stanley.
I thank you, Jennifer, first of all, for having these real talk conversations, because it's going to take real talk and real action to get us out of this place. And part of the conversation is going to be a painful conversation, because there needs to be an acknowledgement in this country that when this country's Declaration of Independence was created, when the Constitution was created, it was not created with Black people, Black and brown people in mind. At the time of its creation, we were not included in that Constitution. And so this country was built on a set of systems, institutions, and policies that at first didn't include Black and brown people. And we went from not being included in the Constitution to being included, but then shifting into Jim Crow laws to again keep Black and brown people out of mainstream. And we went from Jim Crow to the Reconstruction, and then we went to mass incarceration. And so we're at a point now where we got to call our institutions and our policies what they are. They are not about the people who work in those institutions. I'm not talking about people who work in those institutions as bad people, but I am saying that our institutions and our policies have not included Black and brown people, and we have to change that. We have to change the way we invest. And if you look at the investments we make in this country, we make more investments in building jails and incarcerating Black and brown people as opposed to investing in schools. We make more investments into the institutions that perpetuate poverty, that perpetuate incarceration, as opposed to investing in the systems and the policies that would lift people up and build on the energy and commitment people have to live beautiful lives. And so this time right now really calls for us to call it what it is and then to do something about it. The stats that you just laid out, we should pause there for a moment and ask ourselves, why is that? Why is it that there are more Black and brown people in jails and prisons or with criminal justice status that have a host of barriers from fully participating as opposed to those in college? Why is it that we spend in New York City over $300,000 to incarcerate someone, $300,000 to incarcerate someone in a New York City jail, but our students in education is $25,000 per pupil? Why? Why is it when you do a poverty and incarceration map in New York City, all of the hardest hit communities that struggle with mental illness, substance abuse, poverty, are the same communities that are hardest hit with over policing and criminal justice. It is because the system that was designed to so-called help people are the very systems that have been designed to perpetuate the situation we have. And right now, we need to crawl back those systems and put new systems in place and new policies in place. And we need to do new investments. And it's going to take all of us. And it's not just criminal justice. We have to look at education. We have to look at homelessness. We have to look at mental health. We have to look at all of them in order to make the change, the real change that we need.
You know, I'm reminded as you spoke, Stanley, and you took us back to the Declaration of Independence. You know, essentially what this nation has done is from slavery through to Black codes to Jim Crow. You know, like and bring it forward into I should say the last century, the war on poverty. I'm sorry, the war on drugs, and even in some ways, some might say the war on poverty, and how it was designed. It's all been racialized. Nick, help us to also bring it forward, because people often, when we talk about race, we talk about races in America, people believe that we're talking about what happened in the past, and that a lot of what we experience today is just, you know, kind of the residual effects of it. But racism is still present in the criminal justice system and in society. And can you give us just some examples of what that looks like today?
Absolutely, Jennifer. Let me begin first by saying thank you for having me here. I'm jealous of Stanley's excellent organizational branding with the Fortune Society behind him. I need to do the same thing for Vera. I apologize to my communications team for not doing that. The second thing that I want to say is also to apologize in advance if my very exuberant dogs, Pablo and Buttercup, get tired of listening to me. They're right over there. But you know, this is pandemic authenticity. I want to.
Did you see this, Nick? I got jealous too of Stanley. So.
Oh, look at that! See, I can't even do that. Well done, well done. So let me begin, if I could, just by offering two contextual things. First of all, the statistics that you laid out, Jennifer, are right on. We have to understand this country as an international aberration. So we incarcerate in America at a rate that is 10 times more than our Western European peers. And when we got started in this war on crime, this war on drugs in the early 70s, we were actually incarcerating at the same level as Germany or the UK or other European nations, and we chose to take a different path. Stanley did a great job of sort of walking us through the history of racism in this country and how it has been at the root of various systems of oppression. I want to just give some very pointed examples. I'll get to the statistics in a second, but I want to give some very pointed examples of how the rationalization and justification for the system that we have now is really rooted in racism. And so I'm going to name three things. People. I'm going to name Willie Horton. I'm going to name super predators. And I'm going to name the Central Park Five, now known as the Exonerated Five, and the wilding that they engaged in, or were alleged to have engaged in Central Park in 1989, that led to the current inhabitant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue saying that they should all get the death penalty. And in all of those examples, what you saw was the criminalization of Black skin, the use of fear to justify case of Willie Horton that flipped a presidential election. It terrified white America and frankly, a lot of Black America. And this is what politicians have known, is that you can prey upon the conflation of criminality and Black skin that is so much part of our historical mythos, and so much how we how the media ends up creating imagery, that those have been things that have fueled a pretty insatiable appetite in America to say, you know what, we're fine with increasing incarceration 700%. We are fine with more cops on the street, because the only way we get public safety, the only way that we're able to protect our people is to have more cops on the street and more prisons. And so that dog whistle, but frankly, sometimes not even a dog whistle, is just an outright racist, connotation, is what has really driven the politics of fear that has led to this system of mass incarceration in this country. And we should be super clear about it. We chose this. I mean, we elected people who ran on these things, whether they're DAs, whether they are mayors, whether they're governors or legislators. Some of the people who are liberal lions in this state participated in it. And so that's important to understand. I want to introduce the term budget justice as being the most important thing I think that we can address in New York City in order to solve the problem of disparity in the criminal justice system and the massive racial inequality that is a result of what we can think of as sort of a politics of abandonment, a politics of abandoning communities and not investing them, but also a politics of oppression, which has really sort of determined the course that we have been on for many, many years. And so by budget justice, what I mean is that, and I think it's actually really important that this is the fifth and final of the sessions that you're having. We've talked about economic equity, educational equity, housing equity, health equity, and now justice equity. And I think in budgetary terms, the way we need to think about how to advance racial equity is to increase our investment in the first four and to divest in the systems that are part of the criminal legal system that we're discussing today. And that is budget justice. So that means investing in basic needs, reducing the footprint of the justice system, reducing the cost of the justice system, and then investing in alternative interventions for people when we know now that the justice system does not work for folks. And I want to just create this. This is something that's really important for New Yorkers to understand. We should actually be proud of what we have accomplished in the last 3 decades. We have massively shrunk the justice system in New York City. 1992, the jail population was 21,000. It is now 4,500. Crime is down 80%. We are experiencing a small tick. And I'm choosing the word small, importantly, in homicide and shootings. Right now, we have about 320 homicides in New York City in this year. In 1992, it was 2,200. So I just want to put in perspective that while there has been an increase in violence in the streets in New York this year as a result of the pandemic and massive society-wide depression and the poverty and the disarray that has ensued, we're at a much better place than we were 30 years ago. But here's what New York has not done. New York hasn't solved the problem of racial disparity in the justice system. So, I think 90% of people who are in Rikers, about 4,600 people who are in Rikers, are Black and brown. And poor. And if you look at enforcement patterns, whether it's arresting people for or summoning people for marijuana possession, it is massively disproportionate. It was the same case with stop and frisk.
And with fair evasions.
Fair evasion, I mean, like the list just goes on and on and on. We have not managed to address racial disparity in these last 30 years of being able to reduce the size or the impact of the system on people. And the second thing that we have failed to do is that we have failed to reduce the cost of it. Mm-hmm. So New York City, I know people get, a little bit uncomfortable when we talk about defund police. But I want to say seriously that we need to be thinking about how to divest appropriately from an oversized police force. We spend $11 billion a year in New York City on policing when you take into account pensions, health, capital, operations. That's 11 billion people. We, as you know, Stanley said that the cost of incarcerating someone on Rikers is 300,000 a year. It is more than that now because the population has dropped, and it's probably closer to 400,000. And that's because we haven't reduced headcount for corrections officers. And so we're spending, I don't know, 3 or 4 billion total on corrections. And this is happening in a context where this city has lost 600,000 jobs because of the pandemic, where we're facing a budget deficit of around 9 billion, 9 billion in this next budget year. And so budget justice has to be about, are we investing in the right things? Are we investing in things that benefit community or things that harm community? And so what I would really argue is that this is what we have to focus on in order to not only reduce the footprint, but to reduce the cost of these systems, which we have not succeeded in doing for the past few years.
Let's jump in. I mean, in a few minutes, we'll talk about policing and and court reforms, but let's talk about budget justice right now, and really get into what that would look like. When back in June, end of May, beginning of June, when the city was engaged in the budgeting process for fiscal years 22 and 23. 21 and 22. We, saw this, this growing cry for defunding the police. And granted, that term sent some people who otherwise might be willing to engage in the conversation in the wrong direction, perhaps because they thought defund meant just get rid of the NYPD. The title maybe wasn't the best title to really convey what is meant by that, by disinvestment. But then you saw on the other side that when we began talking about investing in services and supports, we even had in the nonprofit community people saying, oh, that means you're going to give me more money for operations and for capital expenses. Like I'm going to be able to take care of that roof in the, in the nonprofit, and not really centering on what I felt we should be talking about, which was how do we really help the people in more of kind of a preventive measure, preventive ways to keep them from becoming justice involved, or to take away from the NYPD the responsibility of responding to the person on the street who's presenting with a mental health challenge or addressing homelessness on the street. Let's talk more about what we mean by budget justice and disinvestment. What are we really talking about? Is it just putting more money in nonprofits, or is it targeted investment to get at specific issues and needs?
I would, just to start off, I would say it's about investing in the things we all know reduce incarceration. Let's start with schools. I said, when you look at the New York City budget for the Department of Education, the per pupil investment is $25,000. But when it comes to incarceration, if you include policing, incarceration, prosecution, we are talking significant investments in how to punish people, how to isolate people, and how to perpetuate trauma and damage. But when it comes to schools, smaller classrooms, schools and with resources so that we could bridge the digital divide, having early childhood education, having teachers be paid a decent wage so that we could attract the best and brightest in the state to invest in our children. That's what we need to be investing in. That's where we know an investment in early childhood, an investment in education is investing in their future, investing in our future. I remember when my daughter was in junior high school and I went to an open school meeting. When I got to the school, my daughter's teacher said she didn't even have enough books to give to all the students, that she had to make photocopies of the books so that students could do their homework. What message are we sending to our children when they don't even have the right books to be able to be educated? When you go to an affluent community, they all have laptops and they have adequate books, and it's 15 people to a classroom. And then you go to a school in the South Bronx or Bed-Stuy, you got 20, 30 students to a classroom, not enough books, no laptops. We are making investments in the systems that perpetuate trauma, and we're not making investments in the right systems. And we need to make the right investments.
I think about the impact of COVID-19 right now on children in schools, and particularly Black and Brown children, many of whom were already being challenged academically because they weren't getting the education and supports and needs that was warranted. And now with remote learning, less emphasis on how to make sure that remote learning is as robust as it can possibly be, and overly emphasizing let's get them back in school when we knew that that wouldn't be a likely and attainable solution. What about mental health? Nick, what are your thoughts?
I mean, Jennifer, if I could follow
Please.
up on what Stanley said. I mean, so Stanley essentially just made a powerful argument for investing in basic needs for people that we know allow people to thrive. Again, and it's all the four issues that you've talked about previous to this. I want us to speak specifically about this idea of budget justice and divest in the context of the criminal legal system. Let's begin by talking about policing, and let's acknowledge that we ask the police to do everything. We do. There's not great data for New York, but the national data show, we make 240 million calls to 911 every year. A very small percentage of them are for crimes and, in commission. They are typically for non-criminal things or for behavioral things, or for very low level, offenses that relate to poverty, something of that nature. But so we ask the cops to do a bunch of things. We ask police to enforce traffic laws. We ask the police, so folks with guns, to enforce traffic laws. We ask the police to respond to people in crisis. If they're having a mental health breakdown, we ask police to respond to people who are substance using. We ask police to provide security in schools. And if you have an honest conversation with police chiefs and with police officers, they will say a lot of these things that I just mentioned are things that they should not be doing, that they are not well trained to do. And if you look at the data, you will see that they spend the vast majority of their time. There's a study of 3 cities that showed that police responded, when you looked at the time spent, like on patrol, on beat, 4% of their time responding to violent crimes, more than 50% of their time responding to non-criminal and traffic offenses. So we're over-investing in a pretty inefficient system. So what we need to do, just to be very concrete about it, is create an alternative. Think about 911. You pick up the phone, you call 911, and you report there's a cat in the tree. There's a homeless man outside who is, who's yelling, and I'm worried. A number of cities are doing things where they have said that, okay, so when that last call comes in, we divert that to crisis responders who are not police, who are mental health professionals. And so the response they have is not about arresting someone. It is about getting that person help and solving that problem. So you can divert. So you can divert calls at dispatch. Really important thing to do. The second important thing to do is then to invest in those responses, those mental health, those crisis responses that are non-policing. And so you invest in those systems that we have failed to invest in in New York City substantially, and as a country as a whole, and start to build those up to deal with homelessness, to deal with people who are in mental health crisis, to provide a safe and secure environment in schools. And what we're seeing around the country is that lots of cities are starting to do that. A number of cities have taken police out of their schools. A number of cities have said, like Oakland, California said, you know, we're not going to have the police address traffic stops anymore. And then a number of are creating new non-law enforcement entities to respond to crisis. I want to say why this is so important and why it matters for Black lives.
Mhm.
Eric Garner, why did the cops come up on him? Because he was violating something in the tax code in New York City because he was selling Lucy's single cigarettes. Philando Castile, why did he get stopped? Because his tail light was out, allegedly. George Floyd, for passing allegedly a counterfeit $20 bill. So in every time that the police are engaging or enforcing on something that is low level, there's a risk of escalation and there's a risk of death, and the evidence shows it. So a big part of what we really need to do is systemic. If we want to protect Black lives, we got to think about how to get out of this over-criminalization trap that we're in and how to make sure that we're building up the systems to address what are really, frankly, relatively trivial things that others that are better suited than the police to handle can handle.
And I'll share with you both that I've recently had some conversations with NYPD officers, rank and file, all the way up to the highest levels of leadership. And what I've heard is very similar to what you both are talking about. They're saying, why are we responding to a routine traffic stop? Why are we, being called in to deal with someone who's having a mental health episode? Why? And they've even said, why are we in the schools just like standing there watching kids come through the school doors? This is not where we should be. They're actually saying that it's contributing to low morale, that this is not what they believe that they're here to do, and they don't feel that they are prepared, qualified to do these things, and they also feel like that's contributing to the backlash from the community.
That's right. And what Nick is talking about is building a system. We talk about the institutions we have right now, institutions that were not developed for Black and brown people. Mass incarceration was, not the other institutions that are designed to help lift people up. And what Nick is talking about is building a system that is designed to respond to the needs of those most in need in our community. And that's what we need to do. We tend to try to take institutions that have been perpetuating poverty and perpetuating mass incarceration and tinkering around the edges to try to change the fundamental gatekeeper role that those institutions have. And what Nick is saying is, look, we need to build a new system that is for the people and by the people. And that's what we need to do.
And I'll show you, this is one of my greatest concerns about about police reform, that when we talk about changing policing in America, understandably and appropriately in many respects, a lot of the reform we're talking about centers on police practices, on discipline and accountability, as it should, and on training, recruitment, retention, and training. It's important to look there, and I want to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, as well as the justice system. But I'm very anxious that if we just center on on what is happening in actual policing and policing practice, that we're going to miss this other piece. We're going to miss, and frankly, I believe that many of the forces are comfortable with that, because it then allows for the continuation of these societal maladies and lack of investment in critical services that actually do build true opportunity and true equity for everybody. Let's shift a little bit and talk about policing itself. and the justice system, from policing through, through arraignment, through trial, through incarceration, and then through reentry. What do you two believe are the most critical, what would be the most pivotal reforms that we need to engage in or continue to build on at this point?
So to build on your last statement, Jennifer, I think we can't look at one part of the system and say, this is the piece that we must do. I think we got to do it all. We have to be ready to meet this moment by being bold. And that means we need to look at policing. And Nick offered an option for taking out some of the responses that police now respond to and putting it in a set of skilled hands that respond to the needs of the community. We need to do that on prosecution. One of the most unspoken pieces of mass incarceration has been our prosecutors. Our prosecutors are truly the gatekeepers of who goes in and who doesn't go in. I like to say, I know our country, and we found it, and we say, Lady Justice is blind, and she's there with the blindfold. But I say, every time when I, as a formerly incarcerated man, every time when I went before that Lady of Justice, I felt like she was peeking. That's a Black man who comes from an impoverished community, who has no value in this society, and therefore that Black man deserves to go in. And I went in. And that's how our justice system is. And so we need to look at prosecution and hold prosecutors accountable for, really, if you are serving the people, putting someone in prison for a minor offense, is that the best use of our resources? So we need to do reform on prosecution. We need to fundamentally reform our jails and our prisons. For years, they have been out of sight, out of mind, no accountability, no oversight. We need to change that. We need to go from care, custody, control. That should not be their mission. And so we need to change the mission and vision of our Department of Corrections. So for those who must be incarcerated because they are truly a danger at this particular moment to our communities, we ought to be seeking that opportunity in our jails to help them rebuild their lives so they don't come back. And then on reentry, we need to provide the resources so that people and organizations are not gatekeepers of the system, but are truly transformers of the system. That it is a switching station, that when people come out, they go into this set of engagements that help people build lives with jobs, with housing, with mental health, substance abuse, education, all the things we know make a difference for people.
Sure, many. I'm going to begin. I'm going to begin where I started by saying that it is really important that there is budget justice. That is, budgets are they are practical documents. They are also moral documents. And so, when we have succeeded in shrinking a system as much as we have, while maintaining safety in this city, we have to think about how to take some of the money out of that system, which, since 2014, felony arrests, misdemeanor arrests, summonses, stops and frisks, all down. The police budget grew 20%. So you got to move some of that money into the systems that we were just talking about, into a crisis response system that is not law enforcement, into a restorative justice process for dealing with discipline in schools and not have the cops in schools. I think that it's really important to think about investing more heavily in reentry supports for people coming out of jail and prison, and the city should do that because that reduces the likelihood of return to jail and prison. But the most important thing it does is it provides investing in workforce training, in housing, in in mental health and stabilization enables someone to be able to care for the family that they're returning to, or to have enough stability to be able to seek a job. So I think things like that are important, but again, I would really begin with the wide end of the funnel, which is, let's start to look at our 911 system and how we dispatch. How do we respond to all those calls that come in? How many of them should appropriately go to the police? And we can stipulate that some of them should, but there are many that should not, and should go to a new sort of crisis intervention system. And we need to start to build that up. And that may be provided by nonprofits, or it may be provided by city government. But the point is that we need personnel to do that. And so I think it's really important to look at some of those things.
Let me ask you about policing. Do you all have any thoughts about hiring practices in policing? Who is hired? Where they hail from? Where they reside? I mean, there's a lot of talk in New York City about the fact that there is no residency requirement, and many people believe that is like part of the problem of policing, that police officers do not know the people with whom they're engaging, the communities. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. It is part of the problem. Look, if you're traveling from 2 counties out and you're doing a shift and you're, essentially, and you don't know the folks that, that you're there to protect and serve, and you don't have a relationship, or you don't see them as your people, but someone else. I mean, that there's an alienation that exists. So I actually think it is important to have things like residency requirements, and it's important to think about diversifying the police force. I will also say that is not the panacea, and that if you have a police force that has organized itself around what is sort of called a warrior mindset, as opposed to a guardian mindset, and everything within the culture is one of us against them, and and that we're just dealing with a bunch of criminals, and that you're not hiring and screening for people who bring in an attitude of wanting to solve things as a partner with community, but are, like the sort of militarization and that rough and tumble stuff. That's a mistake. And it doesn't matter if you're white, black, yellow, or brown, you will get sucked into that culture. If the way you are evaluated is how many arrests, how many summonses, whatever, how many takedowns, and you're not evaluated on the basis of community input, the number of misconduct things that have come your way, then it doesn't really matter what color you are. That culture will take over. And if you have performance measures,
to as identity affiliation, that you may come from the community, but the minute you become a member of the police department, you don't want your fellow officers to feel that you're not one of them, and so you then take on the identity of the police department, and anything that you may be bringing from the community then kind of falls. It
falls off. I mean, we have these powerful sort of group identity impulses and sort of this tribalism, and we all and so that stuff takes over. Jennifer, you made this point a few minutes ago. It is important to reform the police department, to improve hiring, to improve screening, to improve training, to have accountability measures like misconduct records available and so on. But that should not take over the conversation and say that it's all about that it's all about institutional reform or after the fact accountability. That's why I keep bringing up this budget justice issue. And I hope that every mayor aspirant is asked this question, which is, when we think about delivering public safety in New York City, do we just think that that's just the job of law enforcement, or do we think that we need to invest in other systems that can do that, some parts of that even more effectively? Law enforcement will play a role, but there are other systems that we need to build up. And so then that means we need to divest out of the thing that we've invested in for decades and decades and decades, not wholly, but in part, and take some of that money and put it into new systems.
You're reminding me that in some ways, there is a model. It's not a perfect model, but there's an example that can be found here in New York City in the child welfare system. Going back to the 90s, where we had better than 40,000 children in foster care. And, significant money was being expended in removing children and placing them in the homes of other people for extended periods of time, sometimes for the entirety of their childhoods. And the outcomes that resulted were not the best for children. And then somewhere I guess we were beginning in the early 2000s, we began to make a shift to prevention and engaging with families, providing them with the material supports to try to keep them together with the counseling, more money invested in issues or programming related to substance abuse, housing, mental health supports, domestic violence, and the list goes on and on. And what did we see? We saw that the number of children being removed from their families and being able to continue to reside with their families, right? I mean, that number, it completely flipped to where we had, 10,000 or so children in foster care and tens of thousands of children and families receiving preventive services. And that has helped. So there are examples.
There are, right. And that was that's massive. That was system wide. There were performance measurement system and management system that went into effect in order to make that happen. Nonprofits were held to task to, on their prevention numbers and things of that nature. And that's exactly what needs to happen in this context is a broad systemic shift.
Mm-hmm. And it can't be one piece of it can't be the divest and invest without the institutional changes. And I want to emphasize, as you was talking about the residency requirement for police officers, I remember growing up in Soundview projects. I still remember the community cop who was charged with keeping us off the grass and, not riding our bikes on the sidewalk, Joe Domingo. And he was an African-American cop that was assigned to Soundview projects. And I don't know if he came from the projects, but he was part of the community. Everybody knew him. Our parents knew him. There was a way in which he wasn't using this Superman, I'm coming in to protect this community. He came in like, I am part of this community. When I ask you not to go on the grass, it's because I want the grass to stay really nice. When I ask you not to ride your bikes on the sidewalk, I'm asking you because I don't want you to hurt somebody by riding your bike on the sidewalk. Like, it felt so different. And now we have police who are coming to the community and feel like they are Batman and Robin. They're coming in to save the community. And that mentality has to change. And it's an institutional mentality that is partly driven by people not coming from the community, but it's also partly driven by the culture of the police department.
Absolutely. I want to bring in a question from one of the persons in attendance that is a burning question that I have too, and it centers on, it takes us back to how do we even get here? With racism being the, kind of the foundation for these problems, whether they be justice related or housing, education, mental health, with racism and systemic racism being at the core of so many of these problems. When we talk about the importance of disinvesting and reinvesting, we know it's not going to be so simple. It's not a kind of like, let's just say it and it happens, because the matters of race and who is entitled to opportunity, who is entitled to a second chance, even a third chance. In our society, it still is so race-based. So, how do we bring about these changes? How do we get people to center on the intersectionality of all of these issues and overcome racism that persists in each and every one?
I'll start by saying, one, we need to call it out. We need to identify it. We can't solve a problem that we don't agree is a problem. And racism, institutional racism and racism, we need to call it out and we need to say what it is. Once we do that, we get agreement on that, then I think we need to hold our political leaders, our government leaders accountable for being bold in this moment, being bold in that, not just addressing one particular issue, not just addressing the policing, but addressing criminal justice, addressing reentry, addressing education, addressing homelessness. Let me give you an example. Like when Nick said, we need to divest and invest. Right now, when you look at homelessness, for instance, we have over 50,000 people who are homeless. We see at Fortune, when someone walks through the door, about 20% of our people are homeless. For a single adult, we spend $47,000 a year to house them in shelters that nobody on this call would want to live in any of those shelters. We spend $72,000 for family each year. We don't need to invest more money for them to stay in the shelter. We need to invest the money we're currently investing differently so we have better outcomes. So what we need to do is hold our political leaders and our government leaders accountable for being bold in this moment. And that is through our vote, that is through our voice, that is through holding them accountable and articulating a vision of addressing the intersectionality of how all of these systems work with the underpinning of racism.
Did you want to chime in?
Yeah, Pablo over here is gonna chime in also. You all can probably hear him in the background. I mean, look, I'm going to say that I have some level of optimism. I mean, I do think that this story that I talked about New York City and the progress that we've made in reducing the touch of the criminal legal system on people over the past 30 years. It's an unknown story. It's pretty remarkable. It says something about what this city has been able to accomplish. It says something about the civic leadership and the nonprofit community, which has all played a role in this. So I enter this with a bit of hope. I actually wanted to ask you, Jennifer, because you're in rooms that I'm not in, and you see politics in a broader view, and you've advised mayoral mayors, administrations and so on. Do you think it is possible for us to take the next step to not only do the training, the implicit bias and things of that nature inside of agencies and so on, but to take on something like budget justice and make a real difference and start to invest in, again, those helping, healing interventions as opposed to the ones that harm people? Do you think we can get there, and that we can do things like shrink that $11 billion to, shrink the amount of money that we're putting in corrections and flip to not a politics of oppression, but or abandonment, but one of investment?
So I am the eternal optimist. I remain hopeful at every turn. What challenges me when having these types of conversations, because let me just help everybody to appreciate, I am right there with you. I believe that the answer to our problems, our societal problems centering on justice involvement, are not just improving policing, not just making sure that we have a residency requirement, or we have even more implicit bias training that then may, get lost in identity affiliation, if you will. I think that it does center on what are we doing in our communities, and how are we working with individuals and families that have been traumatized, not just for years, but for decades, for centuries, by systemic racism in every form. I think the work has to be done in these other facets, in these other pillars. The challenge that I believe we have with government and with government leaders is this desire for that quick fix, and this desire to center on a policy or a piece of legislation as though it is, that end all be all, as though it's the magic pill that is going to change the situation. The example that I often provide to people is when they say, well, how could we still have racism in America? if we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, affirmative action, the war on poverty, how do we still have poverty? How do we still have racism in America? And what I tell people is that we try to legislate our way out of it, but we didn't center on minds, values, beliefs, cultural disposition, the hard work of changing hearts, of changing values, changing beliefs about everybody being equal as humans. We didn't do that work. And so I'm hopeful, but it has to be a both and. It has to be, what does policing look like in the 21st century? What are the issues that police officers should be engaged in and should not be engaged in? But then where and how are you going to invest in these other critical, basic human needs? As Derek Hamilton says, economic rights, a basic right to a quality education, quality affordable housing, quality affordable healthcare. It has to be a both and. And only if we get politicians to understand and appreciate, and government leaders, that you're not going to find that quick fix just by centering on implicit bias training, or just by changing a residency requirement, or just by strengthening discipline and accountability and transparency, but it's all up. So that's where the hard work is. And if we can do that, then I think we'll get to where we need to be. We are like 2 minutes, we've got 2 minutes left. And so I want to give you all like some 30-second wrap up, just to let us know what we haven't talked about, or what do you want to reinforce, and make sure we all walk away with it.
I'll start with, I just want to read this really quick. The Declaration of Independence, there's a piece of it that was, when it was written, I'll restate, it was not written with Black and brown people in mind. And as you just said, fundamental to our change, we all need to be pulling in the same direction. We cannot look for a simple fix. It is not that. It is a complicated problem. We have to get to the root of racism, and it starts with, who do you see? Do you see value in all of us, or do you only see value in some of us? And this statement, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We need to make sure that that statement is true for all of us, not for when it was written and it didn't include us. And it's hard work.
Absolutely. Nick?
I think I'll leave on these two notes. One is this is a long haul. It is going to take time. There's nothing transactional about it. It'll be an iterative process. So it is important for us, I think, to do the 200 participants here, and others who are with us, to do two things. One is to maintain optimism and discipline, or to maintain optimism and hope as a discipline. It takes something to wake up every morning and say, I believe we can make this work, and then to put your back into it and to not be cynical. It's not an easy thing. It's not fluffy. And so I think that's really important, because at the end of the day, we are part of democracy. We need to call for the change, and we need to keep working at it. We will always find something that happens in a given budget or in a given year to be insufficient, but that has to be a building block to move forward. I think the second thing that I would say is that we have to all work on ourselves to sort of radically reimagine what we think it is that delivers public safety. There is no American who thinks, who has not been brainwashed to believe that the only way you have a safe community is if there are cops in prisons. That is like mother's milk. That is what we have been taught over and over again. And so we have to figure out how to deprogram ourselves and realize that there's a different approach. And Pablo in the background says, amen.
That's right. That's right. Pablo is right on time. I couldn't agree more. I have taken extensive notes, copious notes, and you both know that I'm going to come back to the well as we continue to do this work to build out the equity pillar platform, and do know that we will be taking your messages to the mayoral hopefuls come 2021. I want to thank you both for your time and just your discipline in staying the course and speaking truth here, there, and everywhere. I want to thank all of the participants who've engaged with us today and over the last 5 weeks. Want you to know that you can find these conversations, all 5 conversations, on FPWA's website at www.fpwa.org and at CCC and UNH. Know that these conversations were just the beginning. We are going to be disciplined and stay the course to bring about equity for everybody. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.